Politics is often described as a contact sport, even for those serving in elective office at the local level. The role and expectations can present several challenges, some of which can affect the elected official's physical, mental, and emotional health. We'll talk about the psychological health and safety of an elected official serving at the local level on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety.
Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, and advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So people run for elective office for various reasons. Running for office is one way to make a change in our democracy. Unfortunately, in the same democracy, a significant portion of those who look at any decision made by an elected official will probably be against it. Additionally, what one elected official may believe is the guiding principle, another elected official may see it as antithetical to their beliefs and those they represent. The role can also be extremely emotionally taxing and sometimes present physical hazards even to the elected official and their family. In this episode, I'm going to welcome someone who can speak from personal experience about the challenges associated with serving in elective office, and in this case, at the local level. So this episode is actually being released the week that a lot of folks are in their final push to get elected someplace in the United States. But lucky for us, our guest isn't on the ballot this year. So we're going to start off with the way I feel that works best on this podcast anyway. Rather than having me run down all the things that folks have done, I try to let folks introduce themselves. So let's start with an introduction of our guest, from our guest, with this question: who is Jaceey Sebastian?
Well, thank you, Dr. Daniels. Who is Jaceey Sebastian? Well, I'm a first of all, I'm a father. Um, I'm a husband. I'm a born again Christian. I believe strongly in faith. I'm a community servant above all else, even though I hold elected office. I like to refer to myself as an adopted American because you can hear from my lovely accent. I was not originally born here. I'm from Antigua in the West Indies. So, with the privilege of holding dual citizenship, I am an American and an Antiguan. I have a love for people, and everything that I do, um, every day that I get up, I try to do something that's going to move our community forward, move someone forward. Even at work, I am always conscious that the impact that I can have on others, I cannot take it for granted that I am not, that my behavior can hurt or can help. It can push people forward or it can hinder people. And my endeavor is to push people forward and to help people move forward in whatever aspect of their lives that I can have that impact. And it doesn't matter to me how small it is, no matter how large it is pushing people forward.
Absolutely. So another question that I typically ask folks who come on the podcast, and again, this is not in search of a particular answer, but when you hear psychological health and safety, what comes to mind for you?
Boy, you know what? And I must thank you because we've had a lot of these conversations offline, and I've learned a lot from you around this topic since maybe 2, 3 years ago. And so for me, it's almost a daily thought now. How can people get up and operate every day without having to think about harms in the environment or harms via the action of people, whether it's at work or at home or even in the store. You know, when you hear people talk about even a simple term like retail therapy, someone may just want to walk in the store. I have a few bucks to spend, or I just want to walk around the store because that makes me feel good and that makes me feel happy. But if you have to go into a store in the environment where customer service is bad or people are looking to, pick your pocket and you always have to be thinking and watching over your shoulder, that's not a safe environment. That's not a psychologically safe environment. So, in every space that we exist every single day, we have to try and figure out how can we make that space comfortable and happy that people can not live carelessly, but almost live carefree, right? Um, I I actually had something that happened to me a couple of days ago because of my position. Someone came to my house and they, on behalf of the city, they tried to serve me from the court. And the crazy thing is that I sort of refused to engage because I'm like, okay, I have an office. There's a city. I have city attorneys. Why don't you deal with those folks? And what's bothersome for me is that because my wife answered the door, it had the impact on her that I was like, I need to look into this to see if that even legislatively there's something that can be done because there's absolutely no reason for someone to come to my house when I have a whole government office and we have a city hall where you can serve and do whatever you want to do. But I interpret that whole thing almost like an act of terrorism, that whole encounter, because the person was very rude and to me unprofessional. And that line of business does not necessarily have to be rude and unprofessional. You could do it in a very professional way without trying to, in my estimation, trying to bully or harass people. And when we talk about having our homes violated as an elected official, it's one of the things that I did not even think about when I was running for office, because the protection of my home and my family and my wife and children is like paramount to me. So I don't want to have to live as if, well, and if somebody's going to sue the city, they're also going to show up at my house,
Mm,
right?
right, right,
That is something I need to deal with as an elected official to see something can be done about it.
right, right. Well, you just mentioned it briefly. So, what is it that caused you to consider running for elective office? Because a lot of people talk about it. Oh, there's whatever's going on in my, whatever, my city, my county, my state, the federal, whatever. They'll
Hmm.
talk and kind of complain about it, and then every now and then, folks will decide, maybe I should run for office. So, what caused you to run for office?
Well, first of all, because we were a new city and I was involved in that process of creating a new city, I always feel like I had the obligation and the responsibility to help in any way that I can. I obviously did not run for office the first time around when we were forming and setting up the first government, but I was always there to help. Um, but over the time, the first 4 years and 7 months, um, it became clear that this was a calling that I had to do what I had to do it in the right time. The community never stopped asking from day one, and also we had this little thing also called COVID, and when COVID happened, I happened to have been working at the county at Fulton County at the time, and I found that that position kind of helped me to do some of the things that I wanted to do for our community, and not just our city, but for our region. In my everyday profession and my training background, for instance, I know and I'm trained on how to conduct censuses, and the census was another important thing that we had to do in 2020 during a COVID, a worldwide pandemic, and that is something that by law has to be done. And so I went to work and I helped and assisted several cities in the region. with how to do the census count, even under those very difficult circumstances. But locally in my own community, there was not really much sight from the local government in our area, right? There were other things happening across the city, and we didn't have much things happening like when people now are in, the position where they even need food, right? I stepped forward and I was doing some of that stuff, and so in the midst of all of that, people were like, "Well, you're our default, you're our default sense council person anyway, so why don't you just go on official and make it official?" So I I still feel that my purpose for running for office, above all else, is to help people and help the community. It's I know people say all the time, it's not about me, but I can tell you, it's really not, because the the um the burden, and I would say burden because it is a lot of work. It's a part-time position, um, but it's more like full-time hours, and we don't get time off at all. Today I was responding on email to citizens who had some concerns about a meeting tomorrow, and I can't just say, well, you know what, I'll see you 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. you know, when I finish my regular duties in my regular job tomorrow morning. But but I have that responsibility. I've always felt it, and running for city council is just another way of showing that commitment and helping people, and hopefully along the way creating a much safer and a better and a pleasant environment here in our district.
Sure. So you've now been in office for right at 2 years, so right about halfway through this term. What's been the most gratifying aspect of being an elected official in your community?
Oh boy! And to be exact, I think today's the 8th, so it's actually a year, 10 months, and 4 days. But I'm not counting, am I? But you know, one of the things that I've started here, and this was just via purely by coincidence, but I came across this foundation. They approached me about 2 months into my term, and they wanted to do a festival called the Autism Sensory Festival, right? And that is creating a safe space um, for those who are on the spectrum, so that we can not only bring them in a safe space, but also have vendors and so on who don't normally come to our community, who don't normally are in this part of the county, to see how we can access those services for families who are in need of them. And I've been championing this for the last 2 years almost. And it will probably be one of those things that even after leaving office, I would still work for. Last, almost 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of presenting a couple of proclamations. One to the person who founded that foundation, but also to a young man who our police department did not know how to deal. They had no training on how to deal with people who are on the spectrum, and so they tried to deal with then a 10-year-old, just like any other person who someone reported something on, and realized that afterwards that that's just not the way that they need to operate. And so this led to a training program for our safety personnel as to
Hmm,
how to deal with people on the spectrum. So
hmm,
we're in our second year of doing that.
hmm,
But out of that, from the conversation that I had with the child's mother, this idea was born as to how we can use technology to track kids or anyone, you know, adults who suffer from Alzheimer's, how we can use technology to locate them.
hmm.
And I don't know if you recall that last year too, there was a kid who was lost in our area, and he was lost for almost a week in the bushes. And we physically searched for him, could not find him. And about a week later, he showed up on the side of the road in one of the very rural areas. So had we had this program that we just launched called Project Lifesaver in place, then that kid um, would have been found in a matter of a couple of hours, if not sooner.
Hmm.
Right. So when you talk about doing things like that, that can have a direct impact on people's lives, right? On their safety, on his psychological health, on his parents' psychological health, on the community psychological health. Because just imagine if that kid who was lost in the bushes was found dead on the side of the road,
Right.
all of us who were involved in looking for him, we would have all been devastated,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And so for me, those things around having the impact on humans and creating that safe environment and ways out in which we can help each other. Those are the things that drive me. Those have been the most satisfying things. Yeah, we're gonna do the things, building this, building that, building homes, building parks and all that sort of stuff to help us. But any way we can figure out from people, whether it's making sure you don't have to worry about your next meals, right? Trying to make sure that instead of having to make calls, I can connect you with resources that can get you food every week, right? Those are the things to me that drives me and that moves me and that every day that I get up and say, how can I help this community today? Those are the things that really drives me and bring me satisfaction.
Sure. Sure. So in the midst of these kinds of great triumphs, where it really feels like, wow, this is what this job is all about. Chat a little bit about some of the mental and emotional challenges that go along with being, in a job, again, a full time job with part time pay with no days off.
Mm. You know what? The physical exertion, meaning the long hours, I mean, is one part of it. But someone asked me earlier today, how are you doing politics? What I said, whatever you see happening on the federal level, it's happening locally too, right? And it's amazing to me that somehow I almost feel as if coming out of COVID, we have had this shift um, where people seem to be less patient somehow, less loving, less trusting, right? So one like me that tend to go and say, "Here's what it is. Here's the truth. Whatever not." It's amazing to me that the kind of things like name calling and you know not believing or this kind of atmosphere that seems to get created around politics, where I'm saying to myself since I've been here, this is why good people don't run for office, because at the end of the day, you're not going to have good people who come into this space and said, I really want to work and help the community and push things forward. And then you almost, as someone said, it is part of the job. I'm like, no, hold up. No, it's not part of the job. You don't have to be nasty. You don't have to be insulting and then say, well, you're elected, so it's part of the job. No, what about part of the job, meaning that we work well together well, we respect each other, right? We figure out what the problem is and we sit down like grown-ups and talk things through. It's amazing to me, those simple things. I happened to have arranged a meeting just a few days ago and between some adults, and I was amazed how people were reacting as if I just solved the cure for cancer. And I'm like, "Oh, well, why is this really a thing? I thought we were just all grown ups and we were able to sit in a room, especially if we're able to sit in a room over a meal and have a conversation and peel back the layers to a problem. Most problems have solutions. The issue is people do not sit in the right place, in the right atmosphere, with the right spirit in order to put all the weapons down, peel everything back, come to the table as equals and try and figure out how do we solve this and move forward. Everyone wants to come with their different agenda, and everybody wants to come, and everybody will come to the table, and they will say, "I'm not losing." You're going into something with the mindset of "I'm not going to lose," and if you go into the mindset of "I'm not going to lose," you're really not going to listen.
Mm.
Yeah,
Right. Right. Wow. So that's a healthy perspective for an elected official to have, and to be able to go into these public discourse sessions with that
yeah,
mindset the entire time. That
yeah.
we're you know generally you have to be an adult, at least 18, to run for office in the first place. So
That's
everybody
correct.
gets to be an adult,
Hmm.
and people should hopefully conduct themselves in that way. So So to run most local governments, so there are 90,000 governments in the United States, all total. Most of them are local governments, so cities, towns, special purpose districts, authorities, all
Mhm.
these, all kind of all over the country. And a good percentage of these have other people, other than the elected officials, who actually do the work every day. So chat a little bit about your thoughts regarding psychological health and safety for the workers. And again, these are public sector workers. And again, we we are in a country that doesn't have regulation that requires anybody to pay attention to the psychological health and safety of really anybody, but it requires that you take care of the physical parts, except when you're in local government, because in states like the state that you're in, uh, there is no requirement for a local government to follow OSHA regulations or anything else. So I say all that to say, what are your thoughts about the psychological, emotional, and mental health of the workers who do the work to carry out the policies that you and your other elected official colleagues might develop?
Thank you. I said to one leader, uh, listen, if you take care of your people, all the other things that you need, all the toys and everything, those will naturally follow because you need those things, for the most part to do your job anyway. But it doesn't matter the amount of toys that you have, and you don't have the people to run them, or the people are not in the right frame of mind because they feel unsafe. It's just not going to be as effective and as a wholesome of an environment. My my thought is we are now just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the work that we have to do in all of those 90,000 governments, right? To create safe environments for people in the public sector. Um, I am I'm one of those that I try really to respect the line between elected and employed or appointed people. It's really sometimes at the local government where there's just lots of little things to do, and people need to get their hands dirty and doing stuff sometimes, and you're so close to the people because unlike some other elected office, the higher you go is the bigger your geographic space. But here in the local government, everybody knows you. You go down the road to pick up a sandwich at the sandwich shop. Everybody know the council person, right? You go into the supermarket, right? Everyone knows who the council person is. But for the employees, it is not that way so much. But where it's important for us as elected officials to pay attention to the employees is at that space in those offices where they are, and to make sure that not just the physical safety is actually the physical environment is safe, but also how how do people interact with each other. For those that are facing, when you come into that space, what are the rules surrounding how you engage with the employees who are there? Because who wants to be in a public facing space where people come in there and they can say and do anything to you, right? And a lot of times I tell my staff, most of the times when people get to us, they're at a level of frustration already. So it's not personal. However, I also would push back to citizens and say, hold up, we're here to help, but we're not here to be abused, right? So while I understand you might be upset or frustrated with something, even if you have to take a minute to calm down, because a lot of times if your emotions are so high, you're not going to communicate well anyway.
Right.
So it's always best to take a step back and say, okay, let me really outline the problem and take the personality and the feelings out of it. It's difficult on certain topics, but if we kind of go into the discussions with our mindset when citizens are dealing with the public officials or employees and vice versa, then again, as I said before, you have actually created an environment where you can solve problems, not exacerbate the situation.
Right. Right. Yeah, I had opportunity some years ago to attend a program at Harvard for senior executives in state and local government. And one of the things that they said that really stuck with me is they said that relationships are primary and all else is derivative.
Hmm.
So, I bring that up to talk a little bit more about, you discussed earlier how a lot of the things that you're doing right now, you're kind of already doing anyway, out in the community and being involved and, taking time to do things that you thought needed to be done. And how do you think that the relationships that you built prior to getting into public office have helped you feel better about being in public office?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am telling you, probably if those relationships were not where they were, I probably would not even run for office.
Mm,
Because, again, when I was running, I said to, probably said this to you and other people, I've said, listen, do not elect me and then think you're sending me to City Hall alone. I'm a representative of you. I make the decisions on council that you want me to make. I don't make the decisions because this is how I feel alone and what I want because I'm elected. No, I'm a representative of the people, and you cannot have thousands and thousands of people going and doing a meeting to say this is what we want. And so that's why you elect people. But the relationships that I've built over the years in the community and getting to know people and listening to their problems, right? And saying, you know what, I can help with that. Or I can surely give it a try, right? A citizen just approached me about the concept of deed fraud
mm,
just this week. And I
mm,
started doing some research. This is like 4 or 5 days ago. And it just so happens that within the last 4 days, three different people spoke to me about this issue. And I'm like, so you mean people can just lose their homes because somebody go and create some false documents and submit that to the courts, and all of a sudden you and your family are out on the street? And they're telling me, I haven't researched this for sure, but they're telling me that 98% of the documents that are presented, fake documents, get through the system, right? Which means that potentially has the the potential of creating even an unsafe environment for homeowners,
mm,
right? And it's not just here in Georgia; it's in New York. It's happening around the country. So I am now in a space as an elected official of have wanted to do two things. How do I make it safer for people who are homeowners to go to bed at night thinking that if something happens with somebody trying to take your property, I'm okay and I'm protected,
mm,
right? So two things: information, pushing out information on how people can protect themselves, as well as trying to work with legislation to see how we can straighten these things around, trying to keep people from taking folks' property. But again, it's about creating the space where you can live not careless, but carefree, not having to worry about someone coming and stealing the asset that's your home, you know.
mm. Right.
And
Right.
unfortunately, it's a thing, and it's something that's prevalent.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Yeah, I think there are those out there who believe that it's an either or situation. So, it's time to vote. So I go and I haven't really read up on any of these people anyway. I just kind of pick some folks and, go vote maybe.
Yeah,
And that's not even, speaking of the folks who, there's a lot of conversation about voter registration when sometimes there should be just as much conversation about getting people to actually show up to vote, because many
hmm
elections are determined on really, really low margins.
that's
There's all
correct.
these folks registered, and uh,
hmm
10 out of 100 of them actually show up to get folks elected. But again, there is this view that it's their job. They're the city council. They're the state representative. They're the federal government. So it's their job, and my job is just kind of to go around and not really do anything. It connects back to the importance of having relationships,
hmm
because as a so I personally tried to make sure a few years back that I pay attention to who is my city council member, who's my mayor, who is my state representative, who's my state senator, who's my U.S. senator, my all the way through the president. I know who the people
Yep,
are. Now, I can't get to all of them easily, but the ones that I can, they know me and I know them. And I think that's all of our responsibility. And again, it gets back to that relationship thing. You as elected official can't do it by yourself, and I can't do it by myself
that's
either.
correct.
We both have a role,
hmm
but it's got to be a safe conversation to be able to share back and forth. I got to be able to be okay that you're going to, as an elected official who represents whomever, those who they represent have to be okay that sometimes they're going to do things that I might not agree with. But for the most part, we're kind of on the same page, we're going the same direction. But
That's
there's this
correct.
idea,
hmm
well, I would have voted this way and they voted differently. So now I got to go down to their house. I got to
Yeah.
get up. I got to get on social media and call them everything but a child of God because they didn't do one thing that I don't particularly like.
hmm
And it's back to your point about I'm not. I think a lot of this has been out there for years, but it seems that COVID and all, has kind of unleashed it on us. That folks feel like that's okay, but it's everybody's got a role in that thing. At least I believe they do.
Yes, sir. Um, this year in particular, I have been talking a lot about citizen education because I find most people have very little clue as to how governments work. And I'm talking about from local government up to federal government. And if we at all levels of government take the time to educate folks, and if folks are willing to listen, especially when something is not controversial or emotionally charged, and come to the table or to the space to say, you know what, I'm going to learn something, or I'm really going to listen. Um, I think over time we will do better with this whole thing. People would vote more. They will know how to select quality candidates from others, right? And even to me, even the candidates themselves would probably be better if we all know more about how government works and function.
Right.
I have been fortunate. I have been blessed really because even before I was elected myself, I have been around elected people for years at different levels of government. I was a campaign manager for a state senator. And so I got to see government up close. I got to talk to these people about policy and how things work and so on and so forth. You know, someone asked me the other day when I was at training for Georgia Municipal Association. They said, "Hey, you are." I was asked this question by a mayor in the region, and the question was, "You've been around politics for a long while, even before you were elected. What is the difference?" And I said to her, somehow, now that I have the title, it seems as if people have this space that they should disrespect you now because you're an elected official,
Mm.
without realizing that the person behind the title is still the same person, right? And so that has been one of the biggest surprises to me. But again, back to the point of all of us learning how government should function. Even something as learning the boundaries, right? Where's the boundary for your city? Where the boundaries are for your city? Someone called me a liar the other day because I said to them, "Oh, that development that's right here next to us is like the end of our district. It's not in our city, right?" And that person said, "No, you're not telling the truth." And I was like, Why would I even publicly lie about something like that? It makes no sense." But again, it's the atmosphere that people want to create, right? Without actually taking the time to learn things first,
Mm.
right? And I think if folks take the time to learn more things, we'll all be more educated and we'll understand the reason and the policies behind and the reason why we create certain policies,
Right.
right?
Right.
I am not afraid at all to say I've researched something, I have more knowledge than what you may have as a citizen. So I vote differently than what you might be thinking,
Mm.
right? When it makes sense, I have done that, right? But at other times, I've said this is the citizens' input, and therefore, um, this is how I'm going to go, as long as it doesn't contradict the laws and the ordinances of the city.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it is really interesting to see, and again, you mentioned it as well, how folks seem to think that uh, this person is an elected official. They quote unquote work for me, so I can address them in any way, shape, or form that I want. And I find that interesting because they're also a human being. They
Hmm.
are. Now, um, I think one of the skills that we as a society don't do really well at is we don't do really well at conflict resolution. I mean, because when your interest and mine intersect, we end up with conflict. But conflict's not bad. The question is just it's kind of like having an intersection, and there's too many conflicts that are set up like this, as opposed to a roundabout, so we can get around it. It's so you end up with people kind of crashing into each other,
Hmm.
and then when they crash, they go like, "Well, that's a council member. He's a this, blah 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 blah, or she's blah 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 blah." Well, hold up. How did we get from conflict on an idea, an issue, or a policy to that person is a bad person? I mean,
Yeah.
I find that very interesting, and that carries over into all of the other things that we do as well in business. It carries over into
Hmm.
the workplace. It carries over into school, and into social groups. I mean, there are a lot of these small clubs and nonprofits and whatnot that end up falling apart because people can't figure out how to manage the conflict and see the person as a human being
Hmm.
and not as, and again, they just see that particular thing different from me. And I think that's kind of okay. But I'd imagine that that's part and parcel, to be an elected official. That probably comes up a lot for you.
You know what? It doesn't. And here's the thing. It's crazy because we, as a my current council, um, I said to someone, I think it was last week. I said, "You know what's strange? That having conflicts and difference of opinion, most people see those as problems, but those are actually good things because when you come to the table and you have differences, and you put all of those differences on the table, and you work around them if you're able to do it." Most of the times you come out with a solution that's better because we all bring our different experiences, even different cultural background, professional training, and all that sort of stuff to the table. And then you work through this. Um, my current council, we vote a lot together, but we also have a lot of disagreements. But by the time we get to the council meeting, right? Yeah, we may have some debate, and at the end, we may vote mostly together, right? But that's not really a bad thing at all. It's the process that working through it. Because if you think about it, if you're saying yes to someone all the time without any conflict, it simply means someone is lying. Someone is giving in all the time. And that's not a healthy relationship at all, right? So you have to be able to work through those things and then come to the place where you can find common ground and you say, this is the direction that we're going. I always remember years ago having this experience in church where we were trying to decide on some particular policies, and I was the lone holdout. And I was finally convinced later on to say, go in this direction. I said, okay, that's what we decided to do. Let's go into it. Well, later on, that decision was questioned, and not a single other person stood up to defend that decision except me. Even though I was the last holdout, I was okay to stand up and defend it because I was like, we decided as a group to make this decision because it's the best decision that we could have made based on the information that we have.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I didn't get up and say, well, I did not agree with this in the first place and we should not have done it. That doesn't build trust. That doesn't build camaraderie. It doesn't build relationship. And if you can't build those things based on trust, then it simply means at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, why are you involved in this? So when people are going to criticize us now for saying, I don't know why you guys vote so much together. We're like, we don't vote together 100% of the times, but we work stuff out and we support policies that we think as a group are good policies. Now, having said that, does that mean we're right 100% of the time? No, we can't, right? But as a group, we see that as the right thing to do at that point in time, right? So conflict and differences, they're not bad, and we have been we have been taught that conflicts and differences are bad because where we grew up, we are taught not to question stuff, not to question it. If somebody's older than you don't question them. Don't question mom, dad. Don't question auntie, uncle. Don't even question Mr. Smith down the road because he's an adult. And I'm like, wait a minute. What if Mr. Smith gets it wrong? And I'm actually correct. You're telling me not to say, hey, watch out for that because there's a tree falling, Mr. Smith. They say, don't tell me a tree falling, son. Right? And then a tree falls on your head.
Right.
Okay. So again, questioning things and having differences of opinion should not be looked at as something bad. It's just a part of the process that you hopefully use and you can come out of it respectful. Right. I always repeat this story of mine because a former boss of mine said to me years ago after, we had a tough meeting. She said, Jaceey, you have this ability of having a tough meeting, tough conversation, and at the end of the day, you're like, okay, so where are we going for lunch? Right? I'm like, okay, well, because it's not personal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The discussion about it's hopefully there are other folks in elective office who are listening and watching and perhaps taking a pointer or two from this because this, politics, policy, governance is generally about conflict. It is about different views and ideas because people just see things different. And it's not that either is right or wrong or better or worse or good or bad. It's just they're just very different. But that's the fundamental element that makes a democracy supposedly makes it work is those folks are able to work those out. But I want to ask, and as we're about to wrap up here, I want to ask, what do you believe is your role as an elected official to create an environment? And again, this would be a psychologically healthy and safe environment where people feel it's okay to be able to question. What do you do to create the environment where people will question and will bring up, things that might be a little bit uncomfortable? How do you do that?
Well, as a policymaker, first of all, is strengthening the policies around protection and protection of employees and try to figure out how do we use training around those policies to let people know it is okay to speak up. And how do we train the bosses and the supervisors to know, listen, there's no such thing as retaliation against employees or people you supervise because they speak up. Whether they're right or they're wrong, that's not the issue. If everyone gets into that space, have that environment where you can speak up and don't live in fear of retaliation, or don't live in fear of being disrespectful, or don't live in fear that the next time opportunities come for promotion, you're going to be passed up because you happen to have spoken up on that one issue, right? If we can get to that place, right, that would be the ideal place for me. But as an elected officials, again, it starts with strengthening the policies that we have. It starts by looking at what's missing and how we can adopt new policies to actually create that environment that I think we all should want it, right? Only people who, uh, quite frankly, only people who themselves enjoy being in that space of bullying people, right?
Mm.
And talking down to people, or treating people badly. And unfortunately, there are people who enjoy doing that, whether they recognize it or not, right? For some people, that's a thing. And only those people will probably say we shouldn't do things better or we shouldn't do things different, because there's always room for improvement. As the saying goes, the largest room is always room for improvement. And
Mm.
so, as a new city, we always need to be looking and figuring out what is missing from us. How is it that we're going to create a safer environment? All government, it seems as if almost all companies now seem to be struggling with employees, and we're in the place now where people want to work different. Their priorities have changed. If they want to work from home a few days a week, or have a permanent remote job because it helps with their quality of life, people are searching for those things, right? And quite frankly, with the generation that's younger than us, right, they are very, very, very different in their approach. They look for life, to create the life that they want, the lifestyle that they want, and then they fit the employment into it, right? How we were trained, how we grew up, go to school, and then get a job, and then you create a life. No, these younger ones, they want to create that life that they want, and then figure out, how am I going to pay for this lifestyle that I want? But it's the lifestyle that's the priority.
Right, right, absolutely, absolutely. Well, so one final question, and this question is kind of twofold. It is, so think of something that you really, really, really wish someone would have told you about what it feels like to be an elected official, and then share that with the folks out there who are, again, they're in that last push to get elected to some elective office someplace in the country, because as I said, this episode will come out the weekend before election day in a lot of places around the country. So what's something that you wish someone would have told you about what it feels like, that you can impart to them? This is what it feels like to be an elected official, whatever perspective you'd like to share with them.
I have to admit, the work, even though it's long, for me it's not hard, because, as I said, I enjoy the service and serving people. I think no one ever spoke to me about the the taxing, mental, and hazardous atmosphere that being an elected official can be, even at the local office. So, um, finding a way in which you could be prepared, you know, psychologically, before you hit the office day one, would have been nice. So I almost feel as if it's now part of what I have to do with the next person who would come behind me, right? Is to really get into that place, and even as a city, what do we do for our staff and our elected officials to make sure we have that support system for folks to deal with, um, some of these issues surrounding your psychological safety. It is a big thing for me now,
Mm.
right? And again, I've been fortunate that I have you and others who have delved into this issue, for the last few years. But even so, again, I've been blessed and fortunate, because honestly, I do not know how I would have probably navigated some of this stuff if I was not prepared to have some of these conversations. If I wasn't prepared by having some of these conversations very, very early, because as I said, I'm just a year and 10 months and 4 days in, right? And so, having had some of this conversation for years, in different groups, it really prepared me, even though I did not know, and at the time I did not connect that it was going to be such a big part of how I survive and navigate through this whole system. Because you have to now learn and understand that some of this is not personal. And with government, the battle is always over resources, right? Right? It's like if there was unlimited resources, there would probably hardly be any battle in government, right? But you got to figure out what the budget's going to look like. You know, where you going to do this? Where's the park going to be? You know, when are we going to buy the new fire engine, right? And who's going to suffer because we don't have an adequate resources here and there, right? Those are always the battles that happen every single week in every single government across this country. But this issue of engaging civilly, right, with each other, whether it's elected to employees, employees to elected, elected to community, community to elected, employees to community, and community to employees. It's something that we have to figure out, right? Not only in our local government, but just across the country. Look at how things are happening now at the federal level. It's downright uncivil, it seems like. Right. And at the end of the day, you have to say, is this about the people's business or is it about just the power and the manipulation? And it seems it almost, we basically had a speaker that was bullied out of government, out of his gavel because he hasn't left government. So you have to say, this man seemingly was trying to do the right thing by not having our government shut down. And then he was bullied out of office. Right. It's, for the people who are going to be impacted all across this country, what choice did he really have but to work and keep the government from shutting down? Because the bullies, as I would call them, they weren't giving, right? And so that's why every time we go to this ballot box, we have a responsibility to really educate ourselves that when we go in and we are punching those tickets, we are sending good people to represent us and our views.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks so much, Councilmember Jaceey Sebastian, for spending some time here on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, share this with your friends. Let them know that you heard this really, really interesting conversation with that elected official talking about psychological health and safety. If you're watching or listening to the podcast for the first time, listening to us for the first time, I should say, welcome. Hopefully something you heard will cause you to come back and listen in again or watch again. So previous episodes of the podcast can be found on psychealthandsafetyusa.com. We'd invite you to become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting with us on LinkedIn. And that wraps it up for this occasion. And we'll look forward to having you back next time on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me. And good people, run for office.
Yes, sir.
Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.